Kelly said the very first pump, he just was like, what the hell? This thing's insane. Ultra sensitive, ultra high performance. And, but if you sneak in the forgiveness and stuff, that they don't, guys, top pro guys still want that too. A lot of those guys put the wide point forward. And so that creates a swing, which is fine. But then the average user, when the whole world of what that board can be, when you move the wide point back for the average user, turns into a whole different thing.
All right. Welcome to the Basis Surf Podcast. Super excited because we got Dan Mann. I'm excited because you're actually, if there was a stab in the dark for by surfboard reviewers, to the ones that I've talked to, at least, you would have won. Because I talked to Tommy Surfs. He does great board reviews, and he picks several of your boards as like the most incredible boards, like the life-changing boards that he's had. And then surprisingly, on the other end of the spectrum, you got Noel Salas from Surf and Show. And he actually picked the Dominator 2 as his favorite small wave board. Okay. Yeah. And so I was like, there's something here. And it's so interesting. And that's what I want to dig into at some point, because I was looking at the dims on the Dominator 2 and I'm like, these are so radically different from, your typical, small wave performance board. And I was like, this would be super cool to chat with Dan. And then of course we can't not mention that, Kelly Slater, like you shaped his FRK, and that's like pretty much his go-to shortboard. So you got like all the way from Tommy, who's surfing like 2 to 3 foot, like crappy California beach break, to Kelly surfing perfect waves around the world, and somehow you ended up being the one that was chosen. So I'm super curious to get into all of that. So
cool.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. All
right. Well, usually I like to just kind of get in and start from the beginning, because I think, especially for a shaper, I'm curious like how your entry into surfing and then the normal waves that you surf would influence the kind of boards that you do. So why don't we start at the beginning? How did you get into surfing way back when?
So it definitely influenced the boards I make. So my dad was a late bloomer on surfing. He started surfing in his early 20s when he was in the Navy. And so by the time I was born 10 years later or so, he was super into it. And so as a little baby, he would have me in the water on the front of his board and that kind of thing, from zero. Right. And so as a kid growing up, we were always by the beach, and so I was able to surf. And then it got real serious for me around 11 and 12. And then by 14, I was getting boards regularly and trying to get sponsored and doing all that stuff. And then by 18, I started really liking longboards. And so, but I definitely was primarily interested in the surfing you can do on a shortboard. Bigger.
And you were competing, You're like a competitive surfer, like comp guy. Okay.
Yeah.
Got
comp kid, and, mostly local events, but competing, and, God, it's a ruthless world, that level of competition. And then on the longboarding side, I had a lot more success on the competitive side, but I still definitely prefer the type of surfing you do on the shortboard. So,
and were you in like San Diego area, like North San Diego area, or where were you?
Yeah, South San Diego.
Okay, so,
South San Diego. And so I surfed mostly like La Jolla and south down to the border, and then into Mexico a lot. So those days it was really easy to just take a morning and go down to Mexico. And so we'd surf the beach breaks in northern Baja and the point breaks in the afternoon a lot. So and then in my early 20s, I had some longboarding success as doing the Bud Pro Tour, if anyone remembers that, in the middle 90s. And then so right when I was graduating college around 95, in 95 and 96, I was like, every surfer because of my dad and the way his friends were with the approach to surfing was very holistic, from the standpoint of, you got to swim, don't surf with a leash. You got to paddle long distances and just sail and canoe and, just be fully. A lot of my growing up until I was 11 was in Hawaii. And so a lot of that Hawaiian comprehensive water activity, just being completely
Right.
always involved in the water was a huge influence for me. So
Interesting.
yeah, I really liked and loved all the different kinds of boards and ways to ride a wave, body
Huh.
surfing, everything. So yeah, and when it came time in the middle '90s, I needed to do a really long paddleboard race. I'd already started doing the Catalina, is a paddle race from the island of Catalina to the mainland of Los Angeles and Manhattan Beach,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a long race and real hard, and I felt like that was a good thing. And then I also wanted to make my own board. So by 95, 96, I was making my own boards.
Got it.
And
And question for you then. So,
Mhm.
you mentioned you were competing in longboarding. I mean, back then, was it like traditional longboarding or was it more high performance longboarding or what was it?
It's a good question, because back then there was a guy named Joey Hawkins, this guy Jeff Kramer, Colin McPhillips, and Ted Robinson were all ripping, and they were surfing longboards very progressively.
Yeah.
Still tip riding, but definitely you weren't scored negatively by surfing off the tail. And
Right.
Taylor Jensen grew up in the same town as me, and he's 3-time world champ. So yeah,
Hmm.
but now, and then Joel Tudor came along, and
Yeah.
he's probably was winning events in the early '90s because he was a prodigy kind of surfer. But yeah, with his dominance, a lot of the guys started surfing very traditionally and
Right.
trying to keep up with him. And I was like, well, I'll never keep up with him, and I'll never be able to do the traditional longboarding his way, nearly as good as he could. So I just stayed progressive, and that's what interested me anyway.
Yeah.
But then I wasn't that successful to stay with it, so I started shaping boards and getting it after
I,
it that way.
I mean, I find watching progressive longboarding kind of fascinating. I mean, I remember I was in the water and this guy was like tic-tacking like a 10-foot board. And I was just like,
Yeah.
how is he moving? I mean, I guess well, you tell me, like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you, like, is he pushing just that hard on the tail to get it to like tic-tac or like,
Yeah,
is,
so that's a cool thing. See, like you can design the board with the rocker and the fin placements, and especially now with quads. I rode a lot of boards that were called Twinsers,
yeah.
and now Twinsers are starting to become a thing again. But Stu Kenson made my Twinsers in 94, 95, 96, and because of the positioning of those, you could actually get a little pendulum effect, like a little
Mhm.
inertia going, so that once you get your first couple pumps going, then it's those balls that go tick tick tick.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. The trick is to not look overly aggressive, and to
Right.
still have some smoothness. Obviously with longboarding, but yeah, you can get them going. You can, I make a lot of 11-footers. So these boards I call all-in-ones, or 11-foot and then down. A lot of the guys that I looked up to as surfers from 14 on would surf and paddle around these local point breaks on 12-foot boards so that they could go down the coast and then back up the coast, surf and paddle the whole way, kind of thing. And so that kind of
Wow.
tour surfing is real interesting to me too.
Huh.
But
It's
yeah, you
all
can get
coming
those boards.
together now. I'm seeing all these different influences that are coming together. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh,
Yeah.
that's very fascinating.
Uh-huh.
I didn't even know that there was a concept of like tour surfing, but the more I think about it, the more it makes sense.
Yeah. Especially depending on where you are. So southern San Diego has Point Loma, like Palos Verdes, and both those places have a lot of influence from paddleboarding, prone paddleboarding, racing.
yeah,
And so northern San Diego, Cardiff, and those guys, there's a lot of paddlers there. So yeah,
hmm.
it opens up a whole bunch of coast for you.
Yeah, and okay, and I know that you're well known for just wanting to surf by yourself, like. You'll surf by yourself, and I guess that would be a good way to do it. Is just paddle to
Yeah.
somewhere no one else can paddle
Yeah.
to, or no
They're
one can
not
surf.
willing to. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
good strategy. Maybe I
Yeah.
need to do that.
Yeah.
All right, so continue on. So you were competing, and then and you're trying all these different surf craft, and obviously that you're taking all that in, and then you start shaping. Like what made you want to start shaping?
Well, so initially it was more of to be a fully committed surfer, I should make my own board and surf it, kind of just on a whim kind of thing. and I was working with a couple shapers that were willing to let me use their shaping room and things like that. So I had access and I could do it. And then once after about 4 or 5 boards, I'm like, you can do a business with this, because especially back then, surfboard companies were really small, and it was really competitive. There wasn't a lot of money in it, but shapers were very much surfers first, then shapers. The further back you go, the more true that probably is. And now there's some sophisticated business practices that go into some surfboard companies, but I saw an opportunity by just being responsible, answering my phone, and showing up and working hard. I knew I could outwork people. I grew up in restaurant business, and my dad and mom both worked really hard, so I knew how to work. And so I was like, okay, why don't I start? So I slowly and carefully started making it a business. I was lifeguarding and working at a restaurant at the time, and I was like, it was just a little side hustle. And then I was like, I started getting more and more positive feedback and enjoying it. I really enjoyed making something, like having a block of foam and then turning it into a board. It's like, whoa, man. And then this one time I watched a friend of mine, Jason, ride this little wing twin fin fishy thing that I made him, and he was flying and laughing. And I was like, that's pretty cool, man. And so all those things kind of came together. And then, and then the graduation from college and wanting to have my own business, but not wanting to work weekends and holidays like restaurant business requires, kind of steered me towards manufacturing boards.
Right. And so what kind of boards did you start shaping? Were you shaping your comp boards for competition, or was it like your long boards, or like, what was it?
Everything. Yeah. It was mostly this little twin fin was really successful right away with my friends and me. And then,
were twin fins popular back then?
Not really. Yeah. I was going off of the sort of the IPA, and a couple of us had some old IPAs and some Eaton. Mike Eaton is a San Diego old classic shaper. And who else? Well, then my friend Stu, he was my shaper. He was the guy making Twinsers back then. He's a surfboard historian. His knowledge is incredible. And then the MR twin was probably one of our biggest influences too. And so not really popular, but those are the glass on fin days, no boxes. So the MR twin idea was what we were kind of chasing at the time.
Got it.
And it was easier to not screw those up than it was a high performance board, like going and making I just saw a board that Kelly was riding around that era, and it was so flipped and technical, and Al had shaped it by hand, and I was like, holy cow, so like for me at that stage of my evolution as a shaper, that would have been really hard to get right. And the precision, so it was kind of an entry thing. Like, okay, make a twin fin if the rails are a little too thick or whatever, it didn't really matter.
Yeah.
So I think it was probably an ease thing.
But were you also riding Kelly Slater's like elf slippers? Like, were you riding like 17.5-inch boards and then also riding these wide twin fins? Like,
no, that's a good question. Yeah, so I was riding the twin fins for fun, but when I was surfing, I was riding long short boards. So they were all 18 and a quarter, 18 and a half, and 6'4", 6'6". So because I'm taller and I weighed more, so I thought I had to go proportionate. Back in those days, everything was proportionate. So I like when the surf was good and I was going to Hawaii and surfing bigger waves around town, it was always performance board.
Right.
So I still wanted to have that, but I slowly started. But I didn't want to surf mine because I was surfing for Rusty at the time, and Rick Hammond was the shaper, and his boards, he's a master. So I just surfed his boards.
And so, so you started dabbling with these other boards, but I'm sure a part of it was, just kind of like what you said, like you saw your buddy just like giggling to himself while he's riding that twin, and he's like, I want some of that, right? And so you just started shaping these alternative boards, even though you were kind of like this hardcore comp surfer.
Right.
And then I'm assuming that so where did it go from there? Were you just like, hey, these are the boards that people are just buying, these are the boards that people like better, and so I just kept on going with that? Or did it end up influencing your other surfing as well? Like, so what was the interaction there?
Yeah, that's a good question. So where I went from there is in 2001 is when I got real serious. I had, at the time my son was born, I started a business and I bought a house all in the same year. And so it was game time, and I was going to be the breadwinner for the family kind of thing. So at that point I owned a glass factory, and we would, do the contract glass work for Channel Islands and Rusty and Xanadu, and a bunch of, really top shapers, top brands. And so I would handle, I was handling, we were doing 120 boards a week. And so I was handling, I was the guy going and picking them up, taking them back, shaping 6-7 boards a day myself, and then, helping move boards around the shop. So I was just completely immersed in surfboards for 5 solid years of intense work. And I was ghost shaping for Channel Islands, and I was ghost shaping later after that episode, I was shaping some JSs. So being around those boards, the precision and the accuracy required for a performance board, and all the different components and how they come together, and what does what, if you take a little too much off there or put too much there, all that in precision, I started getting really jonesed on and really getting behind that, and then applying that precision and accuracy into the performance, into like small wave performance boards, into grovelers, into all kinds of funky, like 4-fin, twin fins, and like eggy, weird boards, carving out the decks. Like kneeboard guys at San Diego was a hot kneeboard spot, so they would scoop out the bottoms of the decks of their boards so they could fit down in there better. Just all kinds of funky things. And I had the glass shop, so I could try everything. So I was just like working a lot and working really hard, just not saying no to any kind of custom, and really putting my all into each custom, and really trying to nail it for the guy,
Hey everyone, it's Van. Hopefully you've been enjoying the podcast. Hopefully you've been listening to some good stories, getting some good tips that are helping you improve as a surfer. If so, make sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review. It'll only take you literally a few seconds, and share it with your friends. That's the best way you can support me, so I can continue to create awesome new content for you. So thanks. I feel like that's actually a really fascinating kind of background, because you're coming from this high performance world, right? In terms of you're ghost shaping for all these guys. So you understand that precision that's necessary, but then most of your boards are kind of your more user-friendly boards. And it's this interesting marriage of the two. And I can see how there's going to be some synergy from the combination of the two. And it's interesting because when I think about your boards, before you start shaping for Kelly, I was always like thinking, the baked potato, the Dominator, all user-friendly boards. But like, a big part of that DNA, though, is kind of like what you've learned shaping high performance Channel Islands, and then using that and infusing that into these small wave boards. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so you started doing everything under the sun. You just started experimenting with a bunch of different things. So then, like, where does the Dominator? Where do these boards come from?
Okay, so I'll add to that. We early on, back when Clark was in business, and before 2005, I was really interested in EPS and carbon fiber back then. 2002, we started getting into that. And so I right away started realizing how the materials change how you shape. And then let's talk about synergy. Those different designs become completely different when you make them out. If you made a baked potato out of a PU and it was 8, 9, 10 pounds versus a high, really lightweight baked potato, then the performance is completely different. And then if you make it out of a quad with fin boxes and all that stuff. So I got really interested in the materials. And then
I remember you were one of the first ones to, do the vacuum sealing boards. I remember, like, that's what dark arts are now. And those guys have blown up. But I remember you doing it like, I don't know how many years ago at this point, but interesting.
And so that was a lot of that influence was from the guys who made boats and prone paddleboards in my area. And Mike Eaton was one of those guys. And so he was messing with all kinds of different materials. So then you go to answer your question about the Dominator. One of the reasons why it's so successful is because of it's lighter. It has materials that bend and allow it that thicker, fuller body to bend and perform, instead of being a big, thick, rigid, or sort of like that thuddy kind of not alive feeling that a thicker PU can kind of diminish some of the liveliness of the board. And so it's not a throwaway board or anything like that, but you can just enhance the performance of it by using different materials. So I would say that my understanding of the materials and the shaping together was one of the things that led to the Dominator and the sweet potato making sense in the early 2010. That was like 2008 was the Dominator, 2009 and 10 was the sweet potato, and that potato generation started then.
And so how did those, when you were thinking about designing them, you're just like looking at a normal shortboard, because, the Dominator, I mean, the baked potato is like totally different from a normal shortboard of that era, but like the Dominator 2 is more similar. But what was going on in your mind? Like, how did you end up like going with the design? It's this rounder shape versus your normal boards. Like, how did that come to life? Where did it come from beyond the materials?
I would say not being afraid of the more, so that Mike Eaton guy and Stu both were kind of mentor-y for me. They made a lot of those. What was the other really cool board that Rusty would shape was called, he had a brand called Music, Wayne Lynch style boards. And so Nat Young and those guys, the shortboard revolution, Stu and Mike Eaton were really different eras. They were 20, 30 years apart in age, but they were very influenced by that shortboard revolution era. And they didn't go straight to the pointy, Merrick, Slater, mid 90s design. There was the evolution there of the early 70s, mid 70s, late 70s. And so not being afraid of those fuller outlines, because of my mentors, because of my relationship with longboarding, made me go, okay, we can make the Dominator work. And the reason the Dominator, the very first one in 2008, I mean, I banged that thing out on the initial design, took 10 minutes, and the wide point is 3 inches back from center. If you look at McCoy's old Shane Horan boards and Mike Eaton boards, the wide points are way back, so that you're standing over the widest point of the board. So when you're standing there trimming and starting to get some speed, the widest planing area is between your legs, between your feet, or behind your front foot.
Between your feet, behind your front foot. Interesting.
And so that took away all that pendulum feeling of a longer. If you take a sort of the traditional idea of a groveler, a lot of those guys put the wide point forward, and so that creates a swing, which is fine. And like you see guys like Dane Reynolds and stuff like that ripping on those boards, but then the average user, when the whole world of what that board can be when you move the wide point back for the average user turns into a whole different thing. And I think that's all it really was. A rare aircraft going overhead. So yeah, I think the fin placements are far forward, and that wide point coming back opened up a playing field that hadn't been open until that point. And I wasn't afraid of it because of the influences from my mentors. Yeah.
That was actually one of the questions that I had for you, is that decision to go wide point back. Because, when you look at the dims on the Dominator, I mean, just looking at the Dominator 2, right? And it's so different from your normal board. So like the wide point is shifted back, and then the fins are shifted forward a little bit.
Yeah.
And when you think about a standard shortboard, usually that wide point is shifted a little bit back, right? But this, when you look at the outline, it seems much more pronounced. It seems like there's just more foam kind of pulled back. So it's actually meant for that wide point to be actually a little bit behind your back foot. Interesting.
Behind your front foot. Yeah.
Or, sorry, behind my front foot. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's interesting. So, So this is actually one of the questions that I had for you
Mm-hmm.
as well. So I'm actually, because Noel recommended it, I was like, all right, well, I got to try this thing. So I was looking
Mm-hmm.
at one, and I'm sure that there are tons of other people that listen to my podcast that probably can empathize with this. But I have more of a narrow stance. Like, I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
tall, lanky dude. I have more of a
Mm-hmm.
narrow stance, right? And so sometimes I struggle to get my back foot all the way back, especially when I'm riding a longer board. So like
Mm-hmm.
if I'm looking at, the 5.4, that's kind of the size that I'll probably get, right? It's the Dominator 2, 5.4, 19.3/8, 2.25, and that's
Mm-hmm.
26 liters or so.
Okay.
Like the equivalent Sharp Eye 72, which is not exactly the same board, but that's your more traditional,
Mm-hmm.
high performance, or it's a small wave. Let's call it small wave short
Mm-hmm.
board.
Mm-hmm.
That thing's like 5.8 and 18.75,
Mm-hmm.
and that's at 25.5 liters.
Okay.
And so that's an extra 4 inches.
Mm-hmm.
So when you pop up, and I don't have the 5.8, I have the 5.7, which is
Mm-hmm.
25 liters, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
18.65.
Mm-hmm.
But because that wide point is shifted a little bit far forward,
Mm-hmm.
it's still wide point. I'd probably say it's like wide point more like center.
Okay.
And
Balance.
so
Yeah.
when you're paddling on a longer board, and that you kind of rest on the board where
Mm-hmm.
the widest point of the board is, because that's where you're going to be able to like tip in. But when you pop up, your back foot is much more further forward.
Yep. Proportionate. Mm-hmm.
Proportionally. And so I was like, this actually, I wonder if the Dominator 2 would like help with that, because the wide point is kind of back and it's shorter. So you just end up popping up in the right spot more often. Like, is that a way to solve that? Or what do you recommend for like a tall, lanky surfer versus a shorter, stockier surfer who are the same weight,
I think I'd recommend the same thing for both of us, because I have the same discipline problem. For me, it's a discipline thing where I hop up and I'm already a little too far forward. So I got to adjust and get my foot back. So the first thing is to be disciplined and just be conscientious of it. Just like, I'm going to get my foot back on, even if I look like a total kook and I blow it, I'm going to have my foot all the way back, or at least if I'm going down the line, I'll have it on the middle of the pad. And then when I go, I'm not going to initiate a turn until it's up against the kick pad. So that kind of discipline. The other thing as a surfer, I recommend it I was just talking to my friend about it, is when you hop up, just do one little shimmy with your front foot, get your front foot back, and then that automatically draws your back foot back. So it's almost like getting the discipline of moving your back foot back is initiated by doing just a little. You see the top guys do it all the time. They do a little, and so that's one thing. The other thing is that's a little trickier to do, but it also encourages my flag that I raise about get faster at paddling, everybody, because if you can get really strong at paddling, you're going to be getting into the wave. First of all, you're going to be getting into it earlier. You're going to be coming into it with more speed. With those two things, you're going to catch more waves. And then with all that in place, when you go to get up, put your hands on where you're going to hop up just a little further back. I mean, just like, you go to put, if your hands are here when you get up normally, just do one little, not even an inch. And then that'll put you, proportionally quite a bit further back, requiring less of that discipline I talked about at the beginning of the question.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
those are my big points for that.
But then, so those are very good points, and I'm glad you shared them. But like, what's your height versus what board, what Dominator 2 do you ride? And do you still have a problem getting your back foot back, even on like a shorter board like that, or?
No. So not as much. So my take on boards for the high performance, from the Dominator all the way to like the S-Boss type boards, when I'm riding them as low on the volume that I can for my size and my age, I'm riding around 33 liters right now, and I'm 190 pounds, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe a little over 6'2". So, but what I struggle with from an aesthetic standpoint is, if you take a guy like Owen Wright, who has to compete in the wave pool against Felipe Toledo, Owen's going to be riding normally like a 6'1", And, his whole thing was to, so I'm a little bit more on the, not that I surf anywhere close to him, but like, that taller, lanky problem, and getting a board that looks how we all kind of want to see the board work and fit on each wave.
Right.
And the reason I was using the wave pool experience or example is because we're so used to seeing a 5.7, 5.8, 5.9 in those churns. You take a big guy on a 6.1, it's going to look funny. And our eyes are going to be like, why is that so different? And so those guys all figured that out right away. And they were trying to get their volume from a 6.1 to fit and still be a high performance board in the 5.11, 5.10 range so that they could look how everyone expects them to look in that surf. And I'm in that camp. The whole lining up your height with your board, that works for Kelly because he's already 5'9", and he likes 5.9s and 5.10s. So that scale doesn't work for all the bodies out there. And so I'm riding a board that's shorter and wider and thicker. My boards are a lot thicker. My personal boards are really thick in the center. And then the rails, you would never know it because you can feel the rail. And then I have a lot of foam on the deck forward for paddling. And then that wide points back. So I'm messing around with that stuff because of all those different variables that someone my size has to contend with.
That's fascinating. So what's fascinating to me is that, and now it's making sense where these potato designs came from. You're trying to solve for like a shorter board for a taller guy.
Yep.
Especially as well, if you're surfing smaller waves, you want something that's going to fit in that pocket, right? You're not going to be able to do like a turn on a 6.1 in a 2-foot wave, 3-foot wave, right?
Yeah.
So you're going for that shorter board, but it's interesting because I feel like even though I'm definitely not 6'2", like it's going to help me because I still want a shorter board for my more narrow stance. And then, Noel Solis, he's
riding the 5.4 too.
He likes the 5.4 because he's like, even though, he can surf all of these boards well, he's like, I still like the shorter board, just the reaction time. There's no swing weight and all these things. Yeah. That's so interesting. And then, so the other question I had, so the wide point back, that changes things. But like, the width, when I'm looking at the dims, again, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. The Dominator 2 is 19.3/8 versus my Rocket Y is 19.75. It's like, that's a considerable additional amount of width, but like, and the thickness is fairly similar. The Rocket Y is just like a 16th thicker, but like, is it, I guess you probably don't ride those normal boards, but like, is it, even though there's going to be more width, how does it looks like Noel's turning on it just fine, right? But like, how is it going to, am I going to have problems getting it on rail, or is it going to be fine because that wide point's back, so it's going to be looser? Like, how do I think about that?
Well, so the other factor that is just the pixie dust magic thing where, where we like certain songs and don't like certain other songs, and so there's that factor inside the board too. But as far as like for a board like the Dominator, the width and the volume, all that's a factor. But then what it comes down to is sort of the relationship and the way it lines up with you, or a surfer, and the willingness of the surfer to get the fins dialed for any board like the Dominator or whatever brand, PU or anything like that. You can get used to whatever board you want, and so from a business standpoint, what I've been trying to do in the last 10, 15 years is design boards that cover as many of those surfers as possible in each dimension. Yeah. So that's one factor. The other factor, so there's some design, bottom contours, rocker, fin placement that I can open up that field of usability for a lot of different people. The other factor is material. So like if it's a rigid, or if it's thick, or if it's, heavy or dense, a lot of the sensation that we're feeling isn't necessarily the whole board bending, but it's the way the deck skin that we're stepping on is vibrating. And I think a lot of the reason why the volcanic lamination and for Firewire, or you mentioned Dark Arts before, the whole board isn't necessarily bending, I don't think, but I mean, it is in certain moments, but what you're feeling is the pushback of the top layer of material. And so a lot of the positive feedback that your brain's getting is happening in that relationship. So there's material, there's the shape, there's the bottom contours, fin plate, all those things that will. So when you get back to the width, how you ask the question, I think the width starts looking less consequential compared to your overall relationship. Even volume starts playing a different role with your relationship with that board. And planing surface is a big deal. There was I think it was Bill Stewart, really berating people who cared about volume, and I thought it was a little extreme. But at the same, he had a great point in that that he was talking about planing surface and the way, like, a skim board has, I don't know, 12 liters of volume, and guys are skimming, over, they're hauling ass, and it's rad. And Pipos and all those different kinds of boards do the same thing. So volume isn't everything, width isn't everything. It's the overall.
Right.
I don't know if I answered your question, but
no, I mean, I think that's part of the magic of your boards is you just got to experiment with it and try it. And I think that, because I know compared back to back, it's like I'm on the Dominator, then I'm on the Sharp Eye, and then I'm on like a Cabianca. And those two boards are your more normal traditional shortboard styles. And then the Dominator 2, the dims are just kind of like out there, but like he doesn't have any problems like putting it on rails. So I'm like, all right, well, it should go. And I would imagine, I totally agree about that surface area. I would imagine it's going to have more natural built-in speed because of that width, and so it's probably, and I'm guessing the rails, are probably going to be more refined at that greater width, so you can still tip it on. I mean, I haven't felt one yet, but that'd be my guess. So it's all fascinating how all these things come together. And I guess it'll be I saw one for sale on Craigslist, so I'm gonna try to pick one up and see how it goes. Good. Yeah. So I mean, I think everybody should experiment a little bit with, definitely experiment. You never know what kind of magic you're gonna find.
Yeah, and that's what's cool about companies like Firewire. I think Channel Islands does a lot. A lot of the companies are offering up demos, especially through T shops. San Diego, I think Surf Ride has, in Claremont Surf Shop, they all have huge rental now as well. There's and then also just huge amounts of demos. JS has demos, and so I mean, just riding, opening up your mind, and just kind of, I mean, gosh, just the attitude of surfing. Everyone's so serious, and like, man, it's if you could just take the foot off the gas a little bit and like, experiment and just ride waves, and then be real conscientious of where your feet are, what you're feeling, and all those kinds of things, and just try as many different types of boards as you can. You're going to become like, I'm obsessed with this 511 S-Boss I have, and I keep remaking it to exactly how my original one was, which was messed up. I screwed up on it. And so like, I'm trying to mess up again to reproduce the magic. But I also ride a 6'8", mid-length board that we were experimenting with Firewire. It's going to be called the Boss Up. And and I ride this board I make called the All-in-One, and I make them as light as possible, 7 feet to 10 feet. And
wow.
Yeah, you just learn a lot about surfing in general and your surfing specifically, and how you can improve and paddle speed and things like that, and how they play a role.
Well, tell us about the S-Boss, because I know you just released it. So, it sounds like you're obsessed with it right now. Like, what's the DNA behind the S-Boss?
Yeah, so that board's, I'm genuinely still, it's the only board I ride, for when the surf's good. It's the unique thing about that is the design of it has a V, and so it's a double barrel V. The double barrel makes sense because of the potato world. I'm used to that. And then, but I always, whenever I surfed V bottoms from, I think, the mid 80s all the way through, kept trying them. I never liked them because it always felt like there was a governor on the speed. So it'd be like, cool, your paddling was great, get up, start getting going, and it was great. And then as soon as you start getting into a critical speed where you can start doing really fast, big churns, it had a top end. And I didn't like that. And so Kelly came to me with the idea of doing a V with the double barrel and had all these ideas and a bullet nose. And I'm like, yeah, everything sounded cool. And I'm like, are you cool with this rock or cool with this tail? He's like, yeah. But I want the V. And I'm like, it's going to push water, you know? And so I made him the board, and I made him 3 boards. He really liked it. And then said, what do you think of it? I'm like, I haven't even made myself one yet. He goes, why? I said, because V sucks, you know? And he goes, no, what are you talking about? He got mad. And so I'm like, all right, well, I better hurry and make myself one. So I did. And, you know, that was why I screwed up the glass job. And I screwed up that first one. And the very first wave, it wasn't pushing water. And it was because of the way we did the double barrel and the way that all the V and double barrel under your front foot transition out the tail with where the fins were in the rocker, created a whole situation where there was no governor, and the top end speed was just from those very small waves to huge juicy waves. It handled the speed, and then that V created so that you didn't have that flutter on top of water. It sliced water. And so I can't get enough of that design. I've tried it on a couple different little outlines and different bodies of boards, and we put it on an FRK. It goes pretty good. Like it's that was the longish answer to the DNA of the board is all those pieces coming together.
And so, like, you know, when you think about the potato, I know there's double barrel, but it's not like V. Like when you say concave. V, the V, you know, it's in that concave. But this is V, where it's, you know, if you were to put a ruler on the bottom of the board, it would actually go back and forth because that V sticks out. Yes. Normally, you'll hear of like V on like the tail of a twin fin to settle it down, right? But this thing is this is V all the way down the middle of the board. Wow. Mm-hmm.
Yep, till right in front of the fins, and then it goes into more of a traditional exit of concave out the tail, more like the FRK. Mm-hmm.
So how would you know, if I think, I mean, maybe this is just me having to like reprocess it again, but like, you know, your typical shortboard is going to be like single to double, you know, out the back, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how is this going to feel differently versus like that traditional single to double?
I didn't notice any transition time problem. That might be because it's just so forgiving with that V adds forgiveness, and the bullet nose makes it so also. So it's really easy to tip, but it's not overly sensitive. So yeah, I don't, you know, that it kind of goes back to the pixie dust. I'm not totally sure.
That magic.
You know,
I'm sure so much of it is, right? Like,
no, and I could spew like I know everything, but a lot of it's just like, I don't know, it just works good.
Yeah, that's
but I have my theories, but you know.
Yeah, interesting. And then where does this slot in the quiver? Does it sit above the Dominator 2 or?
Yeah, so I would have the Dominator 2 for just more fat, slower waves, and this board would be for any small wave that has a little curve to it that's punchy.
Yeah.
And more facey, I'd go more towards the Dominator, even in the potato world. Yeah,
got it. Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the S-Boss too, and the dims look more like normal shortboard kind of dims, and I was like, oh, this definitely looks really interesting. I like the length of it as well. I like that snub nose and the pulled in tail. It definitely looks very interesting. So I'm super excited. Too many boards to buy. That's the problem. I'm going to give you all my cash.
You got to hit those demos.
Yeah, I guess so. And then going all the way up to the high end then. So, you know, Kelly Slater ends up using, you know, you end up designing, you know, he's known for having like super knifed out, super sensitive boards. And then you're known for creating these super user friendly boards. Like, how did you guys end up working together? I mean, obviously through Firewire, but like, how did you become the one that ends up shaping like his standard shortboard? It just seems like an interesting connection there.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure luck had something to do with it. And then, my obsession at the timing when I first made him, the first 2 boards I made him was 2015. And I've been coming out of, you know, that was at that time, really, really hardcore working, making 6 days a week working on boards, and a lot of them were high performance short boards. And I also knew his surfing really well. I'd always watched him since he was little. And then obviously when he won the Bud event in lowers, and I think that was I was 89, because we graduated the same year in high school in 90, I think. We're the same age. But yeah, so I've been watching his surfing for a long time. I'd been neck deep in design. And then the about 4 months before I shaped those boards, we were in Australia together at the same time, not together, but same time. And he was looking at a unibrow board of mine that was a little more performance board oriented. So it was like a short, squatty FRK, but not less concave and less racy. But it was a personal board of mine, and it was sitting on the ground, and he was walking by, and he goes, "Yeah, I like, what do you think of that tail?" And I said, "Oh, I love it," And he goes, "I think it's too curvy right here." And he pointed with his toe. I like having a straight spot right behind the fin, the front fins. He said, "I like a little straight spot right here." And then he pointed with his toe at the tip of the tail. He goes, "I like that to be more blunt." And I was like, "Huh, interesting." And it makes sense, because if you look at his surfing, he's just driving the tail of the board through churns so hard with his toe and heel edge. And so it made sense. And then when I decided to make him the boards in that July in 2015, I knew to do that. And so it took forever shaping these two boards, and then stressing out about it. And then he didn't ride them, for 2 years. And that's a true story. And so, yeah. And I forgot all about him, and I was just doing my thing. And then 2017, he gets a hold of me, and he's like, "Hey, what'd you do with these boards?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, and I reminded him of the conversation and in Australia. And he goes, he's all, "My friend was surfing this board here. It was a 5'9", and I thought it was too small for me. So I let him just use it. And he's all, "You're going to like this board." And Kelly said, No, it's too small. And he caught a couple more waves there out at lowers. And the guy caught a couple more waves. He's all, "You're going to freaking love this thing." And he shot it over to him. "Let's switch boards." And so they switched boards. And Kelly said the very first pump, he just was like, "What the hell? This thing's insane." And so I think that what went into that board is what he knew he liked, what I had seen him like over the years. And then I snuck in and hit a lot of foam so that he could, catch waves easier. And again, it's the in front of your front foot on the deck, it's a little fuller there, but then you hide it all. So that you pick it up and you can't feel it. It's a thin bladey rail, like you're talking about his boards being ultra sensitive, ultra high performance. And, but if you sneak in the forgiveness and stuff, that they don't, guys, top pro guys still want that too, if they can get it. They don't want it to be overly twitchy as well. It adds forgiveness and it smooths out mistakes they might make.
Right.
So that was kind of what went into it. And then we refined a couple more versions of it. And then that went into becoming the FRK model that was released, I think, in 2019.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the revision iteration process with someone as precise and knowledgeable about boards like he is? Is he like, super specific with his feedback? Is he like, "All right, I want you to an eighth of an inch here," or whatever? Or what is that like?
Yeah, it can be. There's a lot of times where there was a board we did for last year, J-Bay, that he got like that with. He was like, there's this rocker and this rail, and I need it, and he got really precise, and he wanted to have it work with these bigger front fins, these twinnies, and his endorphin twinnies. And so he was getting like that. There's other times where, like, we made some boards for Barra, in, I think it was 20, whenever the most recent Barra was that 21, around then. And I knew Barra and I knew his surfing. And so, like, on a situation like that, I knew what to make him. And I made him a 5'9", 5'8", 5'9", 5'10". And then, two of them, 2.59s.
Mm.
And so I knew in that situation what he would need, and he ended up loving the boards. He wanted some foil differences coming from previous boards. So he'll get into some specifics and then he'll leave. Once he knows I have a general idea of what he's wanting, he'll also back off and just kind of let me do kind of predict and guess those kind of iterations. And then, but for something like Bell's or Margaret's, that's when he gets real focused and determined to have his input in on the boards.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sounds like, the pros have different approaches. Like I'll hear about John, where obviously he'll like work on boards for like months with Paizel beforehand, but then he'll be like, all right, this is the ghost. This is my plan, my A ghost and my B ghost. And then he just rides that most of the year. But it sounds like you guys are dialing in sets of boards for every spot. And it sounds like a lot of work for you though.
Yeah.
Interesting,
Yeah, it's super interesting. I love it.
Yeah.
But but you're right though. Ultimately, it seems to me like his original FRK, he kept it until 2020. 2020. And then I got it, I stole it. But that board, he wrote it everywhere too though. So it's kind of like what you're saying is they have ideas. A lot of the times it seems like other guys are the same way as Kelly, like you're saying with John. I want this, I want that, needs refinements, tweak the rocker here, but then they go back to a board they just love. And that's the pixie dust thing. It's like, well, this board just works. I just know it. I'm familiar with it. I know where my feet go right in the right spot. And so it's kind of, you, right when you think you know the answer, someone will do something and you won't know the answer anymore. So.
All right. Well, we've gone all the way up, because you earlier you're talking about how you're dialing in boards for like every single like increment of like size of wave and whatnot. So like FRK and FRK plus are probably going to sit above the S boss, right? Let's go back to the very bottom end because we didn't get into that. You mentioned you like to surf small crappy waves. Like what are equipment advice you give, and then just general advice you'd give on surfing small waves well, especially if you do it a lot?
Yeah. So for junk waves, I would say that planing surface and volume, you want to like tune that in for yourself. And the advice I give for it would be experiment a lot. And then really, you're going to want to spend a lot of time on fins. So another rule on fins that I abide by is the slower you're going, the bigger the fin you actually want it to be. And what I think a lot of designs get wrong, where I feel like because I spend a lot of time in that world of groveling around, especially when I'm in Southern California, is getting those bigger fins in the right place. So if you put bigger fins and they're marked and put into a box that's too far back, it's going to be boggy and it's going to feel like it's put on sideways. It's going to feel horrible. Because ultimately the fin is a power source and you're going to be able to push off of it. So if it gets up under your feet and more between your feet relative to a traditional fin placement, you're going to be able to use that as a whip, as a catapult to project and traject your momentum forward, especially right when you take off. So get strong, work out, paddle, get real comfortable physically, and don't underestimate the importance of that. And then tune in your boards and really think about like how you can utilize the surface area and the fin combination together. And then don't be afraid to ride a board with hardly any rocker in it. That's another thing I see other designs do. It's hard for shapers who make performance boards to realize how little rocker you can get away with. And so if you move the fin forward, wide point back, and lower the rocker, you got all the juice in the right spots. It's just distributed differently.
And especially if it's super short too, like, your sweet potato, because then there's no nose to catch or anything. It'll just fit in that pocket because it's really, really small. Interesting.
Yeah, it fits. Mm-hmm.
It is interesting. I have a buddy. He's been riding a baked potato for like years. And I feel like part of the reason why he's gotten so good is because he just surfs all the time, number one. Like he'll go out when I would be like, oh, that doesn't look good. And he'll just go out and he'll surf all the time. And he can surf it relatively performance, and like do turns on it, because again, like, most people are riding a log at that point, but he still gets to rip around on it. So yeah, he credits it as being one of the key things that has helped him really progress.
And sticking to one shape kind of thing.
He's been riding that same. Well, he went from a baked potato to a twice baked in the wood technology. I forget which
Timber Tech. Yeah.
The Timber Tech. Yeah. He's just been riding that like nonstop for I don't even know how long at this point.
Yeah. I can appreciate that too. Because in order to really understand what's going on, you need to be very familiar with the board.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, definitely seems like it does the job. All right. Well, I think I've covered everything I set out to cover. Any last shout outs for you?
Yeah.
All right.
No, I appreciate it. Where are you? You're on.
Yeah, I live in Brooklyn in New York.
Okay.
So I surf
cool.
Rockaway. I travel a decent amount as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you see Ron?
I don't know Ron personally, but yeah, I've definitely seen him around. I've heard of him for sure, and I know that he gets tons of boards from you. So
yeah. He's one of those guys. You can just go make him be your friend.
Right.
Yeah, cool. No, that's good. I like New York. I like the whole. I got to get out there more. I'm trying to plan a trip for the fall out there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Let me know when you're in town. Hey, it was very nice to chat. Appreciate you coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, it's Van. Hopefully you've been enjoying the podcast. Hopefully you've been listening to some good stories, getting some good tips that are helping you improve as a surfer. If so, make sure to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review. It'll only take you literally a few seconds, and share it with your friends. That's the best way you can support me so I can continue to create awesome new content for you. So thanks.